Hello and welcome to the Roll the Credits podcast, where I, Liam, and Rob have just let the credits roll on a film, and for better or worse, I'm going to share those thoughts with the rest of the world. Before we start, though, it's probably a good idea for me and Rob to introduce ourselves, as this is the first episode. I'd say Rob is a film fanatic whose love of film spreads far and wide, and this podcast is his way of sharing with me his favourite films and the films that he can't believe I haven't seen. What do you think, Rob?
Yeah, I'd say that's probably about right. I've been a lover of film since maybe I was about 6 or 7. Started off watching it with my dad, and then I've got a love for all different types of genres. As Liam has said, I've watched a lot. I own a lot, and there's a lot he hasn't seen, and there's a lot in recent times that I've shown him over the years, and I've still got a lot more to show him. So we decided, why not do it through a podcast?
Yeah, and so what's the first film or films that we're doing, Rob, and why have you chosen to bring these to me?
Obviously, I've talked about my love for Planet of the Apes for some time now. Me and Liam have known each other for 10 years, and probably about 5 or 6 of that has been me saying, you need to watch them. So the idea overall is to eventually watch every Planet of the Apes film, including the shit one, which we'll get into later on.
The Ugly
But
Child.
we've started off with the modern trilogy, that 2011 to 2017, just because I actually really enjoyed this trilogy as a whole, and I thought it would be a good introduction for him, rather than me bringing him into 1968. And I wanted to get a feel for it before we go down that road.
Yeah.
So, yeah, in if we were to say in one sentence, what would your review be of the trilogy, Liam?
Well, yeah. To sum up my sentence, probably will need a little explanation first because I I would say my reluctance to watch these films has existed for a long time. And I think maybe it was just a fruit in part. My first exposure to Planet of the Apes was probably that Tim Burton film that came out, and just seeing trailers and bits of bobs for it, I just
Yeah.
thought that looked shocking. And just the idea of apes just becoming super intelligent and sort of taking around the world didn't appeal to me. And that being said, watching these films over the last few days, surprisingly, has somehow become maybe one of my favourite sets of films, or trilogy, may not be a trilogy for much longer, that I've ever seen. It's actually really surprised me in that sense, yeah. So unexpectedly, one of my favourite trilogies.
And I would say, for me, you got Lord of the Rings is like, top tier, but for me, you can't get much better than the Lord of the Rings. But um, Planet of the Apes, I would say, is on the level below. Like, you can't really get much better than it. Lord of the Rings is probably the only better one, I would say. And yeah, I just love it.
Yeah, I agree. Lord of the Rings is just epic from start to finish, and each film on its own is epic and sort of stands on its own. Whereas this film, I think, really each film stands on each other, and the films evolve and build on themselves
Yeah,
over time. That
the
it only be
foundations are built to create like an epic ending, I would say.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's only epic once you've seen the three as a collective and how they build on each other. And yeah, that's the conclusion I reached. I felt like after the first one, I felt like, yeah, it was all right. And then you watch the second one, you went, yeah, this could really be built into something special. And then you finish the third one, you went, that was great. The way they've gone from film one all the way through to the end was really well done.
So if we're gonna break it down, then let's talk about Rise first. Obviously, the first one with Caesar's upbringing and how it all comes about. Basically, like, what did you like the most about that one?
That's a good question. To be honest, from the beginning, it was trying to win me over because I don't know. There's something. Well, I guess the world has already made a decision on that, but I was never really a fan of Franco anyway, and just obviously my reluctance to enjoy the films as they were. I feel this is the weakest film of the three, but it makes the other two better by being what it is. But yeah, definitely from the middle point onwards, once we hit the sanctuary and things start to get together, that's where it really kicks on.
So what did you dislike about it?
Well, it's like it didn't feel like it felt like any other film in a way. It definitely didn't feel like the other two. The other two sort of felt like an epic from start to finish, and like a big film thing. But I don't think they would have been as epic without the first one doing what it did. I felt like the first one almost sacrificed itself for the other two to get to be better. I feel like the first one was very like if it was a film on its own without the other two, it was very generic. It was very it wouldn't stand up well as a film on its own, and nothing that you haven't seen before.
In terms of what I like about this film is probably with me watching this as I am now. What I really love about the film is the interaction that he has with the humans and how that interaction directly impacts the other two films, because everything he's experienced with them means that, when we get into the other films, like, he has more compassion and he wants to try and approach things in a different way. But if I watched this 10 years ago, I wouldn't have known that any of that was happening. So I would have a different thing that I liked about the film the most, like, back then. But because I've obviously watched it so many times now, I can't actually say what I would like individually about the film. But what I dislike about this one is, like you say, I feel like he plays it safe and it's very, like, kind of generic. You probably wouldn't notice it as much if you didn't watch, like, the other ones. But in a way, I also feel there's so many films that I kind of like the first one, like we talked about while we were watching it, that, like, it takes tropes and sort of puts its own spin on it, but I feel like the first one's the one that doesn't really put enough of a spin on it.
Yeah, the first one feels more like a trope, and I don't know if the second and third film has shown why the first one's good, or they've used it. The second and third film elevates the first film. Without the second and third film existing, that first film is just generic and bland on its own.
Definitely.
And I don't know if it was the plan from the start, or they managed to craft that second and third film so well that it makes that first film integral.
I think they always obviously planned for it to be like a trilogy, or at least a second film. But I think I don't know. For me, like, we talked about it a little bit before we started recording. Like, the first film is made by Rupert Wyatt, and the last two films are made by Matt Reeves. And I think Matt Reeves, his direction and the way, like, Dawn and War are made, elevates Rupert Wyatt's work, because I don't think Rupert Wyatt, based on his Rise film, would have been able to have the same impact that Matt Reeves does with the films that he's made. I feel like I don't know. I feel like Matt Reeves' films are a lot more, like you say, epic.
Yeah, they feel cinematic, but I think it sort of suits the first film being different in that way. Because the other two exist, the first film can afford to be the way it is. It's like, I know this is an odd comparison maybe for most, but we're talking about Darkest Dungeon 1, the Darkest Dungeon 2, both having the same sort of core game in there, but both of them stand in their own right.
Yeah, very different approaches.
Yeah, and I feel they've managed to adapt and take what happened in that first film and beautifully integrate it into that second and third. Whereas I don't think I would want to change the first film. I don't think I would want, if I could go back in time and have, say, Reeves do to go back and have done the first film, I wouldn't want it to happen. I feel like that first film needed to be the way it was, because it perfectly because it gives depth to the second and third film from the characters that we know, from where they've come and where they've gone. It's like you're seeing the evolution of not only the apes but also the characters, and at the same time the film evolves in the same way, and they all intertwines, and the first film becomes great in its own, but only because the second and third film exists. It's so weird.
It's it's interesting, really, because obviously we're going on to Dawn, where it's basically the entire film really is a civil war between Cobra and Caesar, but the foundations of the philosophy of each character only exists, like I said, because of the first film, because
Yeah,
Caesar grew up in a nice environment and Koba was tortured every day of his life. So that those experiences that are established in the first film, that you like you say, it's elevated because in the second one that all comes to
yeah, it all
like a
bleeds
major,
through.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
I completely agree.
what did you like the most about Dawn then?
Well, Dawn just it takes it to that whole new level. That's when like when I watched the first one, I was like, okay, this could be all right. It depends how the second film goes on from this. So the second one just feels epic. Matt Reeves just gives it that feeling, like you're watching something special. And yeah, my favorite thing about the second film, and really only fully appreciating that from watching the third, as we've already talked about, how the first one beautifully integrates into that and builds the depth and the story and the difficulty Caesar has within him from apes and humans, and right and wrong, and trying to balance the two.
Yeah.
And no matter what he tries to do, he's got both sides, humans and apes, doing the right and the wrong thing. And it just leads him down a path that he doesn't want to go, which is the third film.
Yeah, it's fantastically executed. I
Mm,
definitely, and I feel like you can totally understand why Koba does the actions that he does in the second one
yeah.
because of his background. Whereas I find in some films you're watching the characters do it, but you don't really understand
Hmm.
what the motives are. But everything's so clearly defined in these films, and so like it was all written like with like forward thinking. So
Yeah.
like you say, that the foundations in the first one, then the second one and the third one, everything like built on each other. Whereas some trilogies are only made trilogies because of money.
Yeah.
So the character development in those is just like it's haphazard because different writers, different ideas, and
Mm,
nothing really complements each other. Whereas this, like you say, everything is it all works to build up to a crescendo.
yeah. Don't get me wrong. I feel this film's quite tropey as well. You got the humans, you got the apes, and Caesar reluctantly, lets them work, and they sort of build that bond. But then it obviously goes tits up, and then they end up having a war. But they've got to work with the apes and the humans to stop the civil war. And it was all very tropey, but they've done it so well, and the
Yeah,
fact
I
that there were
think
apes
yeah,
really brought out more to it.
I think it's a
Um,
compliment that even though they took like an existing trope and but made it feel somewhat unique by obviously being apes that are dealing with these issues. But I would say my biggest dislike of this film is the the villain and like that the human characters that like are friends with Caesar and trying to help Caesar, I think are quite good. But I think like the villain Gary Oldman, I just think he merely exists for to be the catalyst for everything else that's happening. It doesn't really have any depth to him, I don't
he
think.
is, but I don't think I wouldn't even class him as a villain. Like it's the same as
Well, no, but you know what I mean.
yeah, it's the same as Cobra though. I feel like Cobra's just trying to do what he thinks is best for the apes,
Yeah,
and Gary Oldman's character, he doesn't know much about Caesar and the background and how actually intelligent these apes are and the relationships between the two. He's just seen the outcome of the fallout due to Cobra. So again, it's like he's sort of a villain and he's not a villain.
yeah, I
Yeah.
see what you're saying. I just feel like if I had to nail down like a weakness, I
Mm,
would say he's probably the weakest one for me.
yeah, definitely. It's probably the least developed part of the film. Is
Yeah.
that? But
What about
I've
you? What do you dislike the most?
that's a good question, Rob. Can't really think of it off the top of my head.
Or is there anything that like when you were watching you thought this could be better?
Well, the things that annoy me the most, and it's sort of the same as in the first film, the little things that annoy me are where they sort of poorly create the reason for moving the plot on. Like in the first film, the way there's just a couple of moments that annoy me where, when they're working in the lab and they're trying to put the gas, I think, on Cobra, and he reacts, and that little bit of piping comes loose, so he gets infected with it. And it's just like there's no way a lab would be set up in that pathetic a way at that level. Where I come
I
from a
think
science
definitely.
background, like I taught science in high school, and like you would have better standard of level and commitment and
I think
safety of
in
that.
terms of like
Like there's little bits that
conveniences,
bring me out of the immersion, and it's the same with the first film where they didn't realize that she was pregnant, and they would know that they're pregnant. They're doing these tests. They're trying to figure out variables. They need to know that the drug they're using is making the impact and is doing the reason they need to eliminate all other variables. They're going to know this fucking ape is pregnant, and there's little moments like that that sort of break my little bits of immersion for me. But I
the
think that's
one
just
caveat with that, I think, is like in my mind, I can sort of semi-explain that they didn't know she was pregnant by the fact that the company is by money motivated and probably just like hired all different kinds of people who probably weren't fully experienced in what they were doing. That's how I explain it in my head. Like a lack of.
But I feel like you're trying to patch a hole.
Well, I mean, I've already explained that Rise for me is the weakest one, and I think also writing wise, it's the weakest one as well. So that I think if you'd have put that
Interesting.
film in the hand of like Matt Reeves, if he did on the first one as well, I reckon that you probably would have had a tighter. That probably wouldn't have been a scene. There would have been a different approach to it.
So you think Dawn is the
No,
bottom of the three?
no, Rise is the weakest one.
Oh, okay, yeah. No, I agree. I think Rise is
Rise wise, writing wise, also directing wise, I think it's just the
Rise of
weakest.
Rise
I think
director Rise is definitely much the weakest, and yeah, the second and third just pull from what was there that elevates it
yeah,
because
they take the
they use that
ideas and just elevate
material
it. Yeah.
so well that it lets that first film stand in its own right. And by that film sort of being not as good, again goes with what I said. Like the films evolve at the same time as the apes and the story and the epicness, and it sort of mirrors the films and the apes' development,
And
which
then
is an odd thing. And I think that's almost accidental, but it works.
we move on to put my personal favorite of the trilogy, War of the Apes, which it makes me cry. I'll straight up. But the ending of this film, I'm always in tears, man.
Yeah, this film, yeah, like it's this film that elevates the whole trilogy into being epic. Like it was at the end of this film where I went, okay, yeah, this trilogy is fantastic. This film makes that first film that like the first film for me on its own is a 6 out of 10, and the second film it elevates it to maybe a 6.5 to a 7, and this film raises it again to maybe a 7.5. Maybe a bit too kind to an 8 because of the way they use it, but only with these films existing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, this is the film that elevates it to that top level. Like cinematically, there's
so many elements in this one specifically. Like you say, that I mean the beginning. I mean the whole waterfall home and stuff. That looks beautiful. That does.
Yeah, the world that they built for the films to take place in is so well done, and that helps the story because everything is complete top tier epicness and cinematically feels amazing. And this film, it's weird. Like when I first started watching it, like with the first part of it, you think this is like if this was just a normal war film, you think that was done so well. That was an epic bit of a war film, and then it moves on, and it's like a journey of a small group, and it had like a sort of western feel to it, but going out through the open and up against the odds, and there's like 4 or 5 different types of films in one. But
yeah,
it
you got like
worked,
the
and
massive Great Escape at the end, and all
then
that.
you get to like the Great Escape bit, and but it does it right. You think,
it all
on
merges
paper,
into
it looks
one.
like a mess and it's weird. There's too many ideas thrown. Like you got too many cooks in the kitchen type deal. But it's weaved perfect. It's
Absolutely.
so good, and again because it uses all the material from the first and second film so well to do it.
Yeah, absolutely, definitely. I just, for me, like you say, it this film, like the action, like in the whole war aspect of it, is great, but also like the journey and the development of the characters. Like I feel like there's a lot of not just Caesar and you obviously my favorite Maurice. He develops more in this one, and then
Yeah.
like you even got like characters like Luca when he like you understand that he's like he's one of Caesar's boys, and
Hmm.
he's the bruiser, like the general type. And then when he dies, and that's emotional in itself. And then from there, I feel like once Luca dies, the film just like goes on another level of like of everything. You know what I mean? Because that gives Caesar his reason to to go on with everything that happens.
Yeah. And like you talk about Maurice, he got to like develop the characters have developed more in this one. But again, it's because of the first one. Like you see Maurice in the first film, how he interacts with him in the sanctuary, and then the second one, you see him, how he develops the balance with Koba and Caesar, and you see him interact with the kid with the book
Yeah.
when trying to trust the humans, and all of that builds that character to the point where you see him with Nova.
Yeah, he becomes like the father figure for her.
Yeah, but also just the relationship he has with Caesar from 1 to 3, and the things he does. It's weird. To me, it almost feels like it was almost accidental. I feel like it's so well done that they couldn't have even planned it to be that good. The way it all fits together.
Yeah, I definitely like. I reckon it was accidental on Rise's part, but then Reeves obviously took those elements that he liked from Rise and built upon it. Yeah, and I actually think like Woody Harrelson's character is like quite well defined in this one. Like you can understand like it's kind of like Koba and what you said about Gary Oldman. Like he was like he knew that humans as they are
Hmm.
were on the way out, and obviously he is the things he does in the film when he talks about how he killed the people that opposed him and stuff.
Hmm.
You can understand that in his mind it was do or die. So I feel like he's a lot more defined than Gary Oldman's character, for example.
That's the thing. It was do or die, and but yeah, he was definitely a lot more developed than Gary Oldman's character. Like it was a step up in moving the story on. But yeah, it was do or die, and you think he's this big horrible person that's done all these horrific things, but then at the end, and I'm expecting this big showdown when Caesar's gone back and he's
Yeah,
he said this is his Cobra moment where the hatred's taken over and he just has to go deal with it, and you're expecting this big fight, this big thing, and then you see the
it's just a
real side
blubbering mess, basically.
of Harrison, yeah, and like clearly everything he's done from his son to the terrible things that there's just taken a bigger toll on him than he's shown, and he's obviously just not shown it because he's had to keep his people going on the back of that.
Well, yeah,
And
because he gets obviously he gets infected from Nova's teddy,
yeah,
doesn't he?
I
And
think
it's like
that's when it sinks in. Like, yeah, he hits that point and he realizes he's done all that crap, and I think because he talks about nature early in the film, where nature's sort of punishing humanity for what it's done,
yeah, yeah.
and I feel like he he sees that as nature's punishing him for what he's done as well, and really nothing he could have done would have stopped anything, and
No.
all the sacrifices that he thought he made for the right reason was completely pointless in the end. So I feel like yes, him getting sick was the catalyst for that, but he wasn't upset maybe because he was sick. It was the sickness that made him realize that
Yeah,
it
I
was
think this you can tell at that point he's accepted death, like for sure.
yeah. And he's just realised, there was what he should have. Yeah, clearly regretted shooting his son because in the end, nature was always going to win. Nature punished humanity, and it punished him. And yeah, and initially I was quite upset. I think you heard me in the film when he got in there and he's got the gun to him and he's angry and
Yeah, yeah,
I'm going to take that moment to actually stop because the CGI and the way they get those gorillas and the emotion to come across them and the way they got those apes in those films to be as good as are is incredible. They look amazing. You can get the emotion through them,
yeah,
and
absolutely.
it's so good. And you really see it in that moment where Caesar's there with the gun and he's got that emotion
Yeah,
and
and
that
he's like
anger, and you still see
he's
the ape,
yeah,
and it's so well done. It's so CGI is brilliant, the emotion is brilliant, the motion capture, the way they've done it all is so good. And you're in that moment and you're like, right, this is gonna fucking go now. This is where you're gonna see Caesar full on release his hatred.
Give in to the dark side sort of thing.
Yeah, where he realizes, completely understands Cobra instead of like but more having anger to Cobra, just understands Cobra even though he was wrong. And then he sort of pulls it down and he shoots himself. And originally I was disappointed. I was like, that's just taken away.
He watches him do it as well, doesn't he?
Yeah. Takes away an epic moment. And then like 30 seconds after I felt that sort of like let down, I realized, no, that's the right way to do it, because it finishes off the Colonel's perfect story arc and his realization, nature's come back to get him. It's the Caesar's origins and everything that's built up in Caesar over time comes out in that as well.
If Caesar had shot him, I think it would have undone all of the character development that the other films have been working towards, because he would have gone against his principles, really.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was just that's probably was my favorite part of the film, was just having that moment where it got up to it and I was like, here he goes, and he's got his gun and you see the emotion and the anger, and it's so well done. And then I had that initial feeling of, oh, really? That's how that bit ends? And then 10 seconds later, I realised how good and perfect it is. That's probably my favourite whole moment, just that my brain clicking throughout those 30 seconds.
I like the bit where Red Donkey finally decides not to be an arsehole.
Well, you see it as well building up. You can hear me during the film. It's like, go on then, just do it. You know you're gonna. I was expecting to grab the NMG and turn and shoot them or something. I was like, they built up to that moment so long that I thought it was going to come earlier than it did. And even when the explosion came down to save Caesar, I didn't even realize that was him. I thought that was coming from the missiles from the army approaching. And then he turned around and it's like, oh, there we go. Now he's finally, now he's finally kicked in. And then, and again, the film, it's like, it keeps that epicness and that cinematicness. It doesn't go into like, oh, he becomes a hero and he joins them immediately afterwards. That guy is there with anger, shot in the head, and it's raw and it's cinematic and it's epic. And it just maintains the film.
I think if it turned like that moment in Red Donkey into a hero, like they couldn't have done that without it feeling really weird, because he has spent a lot of the film like torturing his other apes and stuff. And just that one act of like saving Caesar doesn't redeem all that. Whereas I feel like in some films they would probably try and sell it as like that is a redeemer.
That's what I mean. The film maintained its epicness. Like nowadays they'll be trying to redeem him and he becomes good and he can forgive what he's done, and he's no, this film's just raw. It keeps its feel. It's cinematic. Not everything in life is great, from Cobra to even in the Sanctuary. And this is what I mean with Rise in the Sanctuary, and you've got flipping. That's how bad. In my mind, he's always going to be the Harry Potter Malfoy guy, and you have Malfoy in there torturing the apes and treating them like crap through it. There's still that rawness and that evilness, and there's no. And
Red Donkey's death is like he accepts it as well. Like you can tell, like as soon as he fires that bullet, he knows what's coming.
Yeah, I like seeing the emotion of the soldier's face behind him. Like that's just, I don't know what. I'm assuming an actor that I have no idea who he is. It's probably nothing, but I felt the actor was brilliant in his way. That he just turned around the anger show, and just him just standing there, Red Donkey.
He like drops his hands to his side, and he's just like, just shoot me out. I know it's coming.
Yeah, and I feel like he's also accepted the bullet because he sort of realized
he realizes what he's done. Yeah, and it's
just like the Colonel.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say about Malfoy. In the first film, he gets his comeuppance. He gets killed in a horrific way with the water and the electricity, and it's horrible. Whereas the good thing happens in the end. Whereas the films evolve from the first film to the last. It's not always.
It's not always roses.
Yeah,
like there are like sacrifices and casualties along the way. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it was. I don't know the trilogy in itself, and I keep saying trilogy, but it's not really going to be a trilogy anymore. But I don't know what to call it, the set of films. We don't even know if it's just
Well,
going to be a quadrilogy.
I think you could say this is Caesar's trilogy because obviously the impact of
Caesar
Caesar will be
arc.
felt. Yeah, will be
It's an
felt,
arc,
but
but
well,
yeah,
it's a trilogy about Caesar, isn't it? Really?
Caesar's trilogy. But with the fourth film, the way it sounds like, it directly continues on from it. All the films, there's gaps between each film. It has the
Well,
natural progression.
the
So
we haven't watched the originals yet, but the
no.
originals have like they have Caesar's teachings. There's like the Bible in those films. So I'm wondering whether they might go down that route as having like Caesar's principles as being their way of life, and then so while he'll be impacting it, it'll just be Caesar's got his own trilogy, and then I mean they might have Cornelius be in it. He might be the main character this time because he'll have grown up at that point.
Yeah, that's it. So the question is how far years wise is it from
Yeah.
from war? So it'll be interesting. The concept art and from what the little like brief synopsis of it just gives me massive Horizon vibes. Like just the way everything looks, trying to connect with the old technology that they've got real no connection to. It just completely feels like Horizon to me. So hopefully it continues.
Yeah, I mean,
the trilogy in a good vein.
we've talked obviously before by podcast. We got a bit of trepidation about whether it will really be able to carry on the quality of the others, but I feel like they've got to really. The foundations are there. Like they surely can't go too wrong with it.
Yeah, it's just with Reeves not being fully involved. I know what's his name, Rick Jaffa's there. It's just I don't know much about Wesball. You were mentioning him. He's the Maze Runner guy. I've not seen those films, so.
I mean, all I'll say of Maze Runner is like the final Maze Runner film is kind of like made in a way that's similar to War of Planet of the Apes. Like everything all like culminates in it. It does have that epic scale to it. So I feel like he can do an epic scale film, but I feel like I quite like if they maybe reduce the scope back to like the Dawn level, because Dawn was quite a reduced scope. Like there was a lot of big epic moments in it, but the actual scope of the film was quite small. And I wonder maybe that might be a good base to start off from.
But I feel like the scope sort of had they do a good job of these films of it really being a funnel instead of just jumping from one film to the next, and it gets the scope gets bigger and bigger so ridiculously. Like it is a natural progression, and I feel like they picked the perfect time jumps between each film.
Oh yeah,
And
definitely.
with Caesar's death at the end, it allows for a good time jump now and to really move on, but hopefully still keep the first three films bleed through a bit.
It would be interesting to see if they jumped it forward by like 100, 200 years, because you would really start to see then the divisions between like those who followed Caesar's teachings and principles and those who might not. And you'd also like you'd really like delve into like the aftermath on the humans and whether some people might have actually resisted the change in the virus and whatnot. Because I'm curious how they go about, because they've obviously already established in this one that eventually the virus will reduce everyone's speech and mental capacity. So now we're jumping forward again, but obviously there is plenty of humans in the cast.
Yeah.
How are they going to approach that?
Yeah, because from what they've given us, the little bit of tidbit that we have about that film is, it sounds like humanity plays a very minimal part in that film, apart from one or two characters. But if there's so much human people cast, then how does it move on from that? I don't know. But I guess we'll just have to find out.
I mean, yeah, in exactly really a year from when we're recording this, like we'll probably have to do a podcast revisiting it and probably listen back to this one and talk about like what was
We're
right and what was wrong about it.
100% gonna have to do this film when it releases. We need to just get out there, watch that immediately.
Yeah, definitely.
It's so funny that the whole idea of Planet of the Apes just does not interest me at all, and couldn't be bothered. And now I've finished that third film in the last few hours, and I genuinely can't wait to watch the next one. It's so strange, and even now, like the whole premise of the thing doesn't interest me that much. It's just been so well done from 1 to 3 that I can't wait for that fourth one. And I think and maybe it's gonna cause issues when we go back to watch the original films, but because this has been so well done as a set of films in its own right, that I'm gonna find it harder to enjoy the original films.
Well,
But we'll see.
in a similar way to what we've talked about here, where the sequels build upon the foundations that are set, but definitely the third and fourth Planet of the Apes films, like they were almost like part one and part two. So there's definitely like levels to the films themselves. Like I would say actually, when I think about it, like compared to a lot of films that came out by back then, they probably did have a lot better writing in these than your typical like sci-fi films of that age. A lot of them were just like throwaway TV movies or whatever, but
Yeah.
there is actually like a progressive story through the five, and
Okay.
I think you'll appreciate that on some level.
Yeah, I mean, I might enjoy it, but yeah, just from how much I ended up loving the 3 films we've watched so far, I just don't see how it can live up to how I feel for these.
Yeah,
But
I don't think that you'll love the originals as much as you'll love these ones. But
yeah,
we were talking about this is how like your exposure to, because you asked me if I watched the originals after I watched these, but I watched the originals first. So
yeah,
that probably does have an impact to it. But I guess we'll find out when we come to it. To be fair.
yeah. We'll definitely have to have an episode down the line once we've watched all these old ones, and we could talk about those and how I feel between that one and this one. But
So in conclusion, then. I want you to pick out. Well, you've already somewhat said it, but I want you to like pick out your favorite moment out of the three, or favorite moments if you've got one or more.
see, that's the weird thing about these films is most films you have your favorite part or your favorite character or your favorite bit, but the thing that's made me fall in love with these films is just the development from each one, how each one bleeds into each other, and like you can almost trace back the steps of how each moment has derived all the way from the first film, and that's the thing that's really taken me. But I don't know. I think my favorite moments were just in the third film, having like watching that war bit at the start. I thought, oh, this could be an incredible war film, and it's totally different from the first and second, and then it's a complete different other type of film, and like, it keeps wowing me at being different films.
Yeah,
But yeah, probably my favorite moment of all three is the bit I mentioned where I had that initial disappointment with Caesar and the Colonel's confrontation, and like the
yeah,
initial like,
definitely.
oh, is that really it? And then realizing and thinking it through and connecting all the dots and all the things he said, all the things that happened to Caesar in the first film, the second film, and Cobra, just how it all comes together. Like that 30 seconds of thought I had, I was like, fucking hell, they really made these three films so good together. Like, there's not many films, if any, where I've had a moment like that.
Yeah,
That's why
yeah.
I love it so much.
I would say like my favorite, maybe not a moment, but just the writing for Koba and Caesar, and I
Mm.
just love how the entire like the moments they have together, where it's you could tell they're both on the right, like they're both on the right side in a way because they both want the same thing, but they're taking it from different ways. I really love like the whole like writing aspect of that.
Yeah, and how you can see why they have those decisions, and yeah, how it's built up to that, and how Cobra goes off and he sees the depot with all the guns and all the ammos and stuff. So, but oh yeah, it's so well done. Yeah, I'm really surprised. I did not think I would love when we were starting this whole podcast idea. and we talked about a load of films that I hadn't seen that Rob wanted to show me. I'm not going to lie, when you put these 3 films as our first choice, the first thing we're going to have to do, there's a little part of me that was a little bit disappointed because I didn't think I was going to enjoy them. And now I completely taken over by them. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely love them.
Sometimes I admit my taste might be questionable, but I knew that if you give these a chance, you would appreciate them.
Yeah, your tastes are questionable, and people will soon realise as we get further. I think we've got some amazing films that we picked coming up that I haven't seen that are renowned good films. But once we get past those first few, like, you have some weird and crazy shit, and some things you've shown me over the years, and I'm like, how is this a film? This shit. And I'm going to mention it now. Rubber.
I mean, I'll tell you straight up. You think Rubber is like, what the fuck? How have they made this into a film? I've seen some films come out in recent years that even I wouldn't go near, anywhere fucking near. There's like one about like killer pair of jeans and stuff like like honestly, like there's
but that's what I mean. You agree it's shit. Whereas Rubber, I think
genuinely
I would have
Rubber.
enjoyed. That's the thing. Like, if Rubber on its own, I just watched it, I'd find it hilarious and I'd love it just because it's funny in its own right and it's different. But at the end of the day, it is stupid and crap. But it's so original and different that it's funny. But because you genuinely talk about it like it's this great film, with like
I don't think it's a great film. I just think it's a really like. I just think it's a fun. It's a film that's completely fucking bizarre, but it knows it's bizarre, and that's why I like it. Because there are like, it understands that the idea of it is ridiculous, and it just sort of runs with it. And I mean, a perfect example of that is at the end when he does eventually get killed, the tire, and he reincarnates as the fucking tricycles. Like it knows it's fucking mental, and that's what I like. I like that aspect of films. I like films that don't hide what they are; they just embrace it.
Yeah. But I don't know. There's just something about it. I don't know. Eventually, we'll have to watch it together eventually. But I don't know. But that's the thing. Like that, I'm mentioning that, and there's way weirder and way crazier films than that we'll probably eventually dip into at some point.
Oh God, yeah, I mean, since I've mentioned it now, at some point we are gonna have to watch the Killer Jeans.
What's it called? Is it called Killer Jeans?
I'd have to maybe Killer Jeans film. It's called Slacks. SLAXX.
Oh, the name and it's I hate it already. I hate the name.
Came out 2020. A possessed pair of jeans terrorizes trapped workers at a trendy clothing store.
Oh my God, I hate it already.
And do you know what's even more? It has a 5.4 out of 10 from 3,000 people.
Probably too generous. But yeah, that's just that.
So that's the end of episode 1. I hope you've enjoyed listening to us ramble for about 50 minutes. And yeah, we'll see you next time.
Yeah. Do we know what we're going to do for our next film?
Oh, the next one, according to our schedule, is an absolute Asian favourite of mine, House of Flying Daggers. Now, I absolutely adore it.
Yeah, and it's one of those films that I've always heard about as being one of those great films, and I've just never ever seen it like at all. So I'm looking forward to watching that one. I've got higher hopes of that one than I did for Planet of the Apes. I didn't have any hope for Planet of the Apes, so it'd be good to
we'll certainly be interested to see if there's a reverse it by the end.
Yeah, that's it. Well, I guess we'll find out.
Well, on that note, we'll see you in the next one.
See you in the next one. Roll the credits.